Hello fellow humans! So I watched Shadow and Bone on Netflix after taking the recommendation of Sosteen, who has made herself her own healer Kefta. And I was really inspired by her video to go and watch the show. So I went and watched the show and now I want my very own Kefta. However, I'm not very good at this. Today I'm going to be making a Shadow and Bone inspired Kefta. And now I use the terms Shadow and Bone inspired very loosely here because, well, I don't have a proper Kefta pattern and I also don't have the means or ability to be able to embroider. And pretty much the whole focal point of a Kefta is the embroidery on the front. Another reason why it's kind of inspired and not exactly is because I honestly don't know where I would fit within the Grisha verse. My first choice in being a Grisha would probably be an Inferni, but at the same time, throughout the series, they're possibly the most useless kind of Grisha, along with Tidemakers. They literally never show up. But I'm a little bit confused as to what I would be, so I just picked the most beautiful Kefta in the season that I liked, and that was Alina's Black Winter Fate Kefta. It is the most beautiful thing on the planet, and if one day I learned how to embroider, I would get my hands on one of those things pronto. But for now, I'm basically just going to be going through a base that someone else could use in order to make their own Kefta, and I do have a substitute for the embroidery. It's not the best substitute, but I'm sure someone else would be able to make it work much better than me.
Now this story time is a bit different from the rest because this actually occurred during the time I was making this project. September 22nd, 9:15 AM, I was sitting on my bed looking down at the remaining homework I had to do when my vision started shaking. My first thought was that I was going dizzy and about to faint, which funnily enough was the exact thought my mother had in the moment while she was at work, as well as a lady sitting a few meters from her. But as I looked up, I realized the vicious trembling was not a health problem on my part, as I could perfectly well see that everything was shaking. My brother also called out to me from the other room asking if I could feel the shaking. At this point, I did grab my phone and start recording, but the footage is largely discombobulated and mostly just captures the mess in my house, but this is some of the only thing that I could get. It was quite scary, and one of the reasons I wasn't very focused on good footage was because the initial shake was very strong. And I was worried because I didn't know correct earthquake protocol, so when the shaking kept going or got stronger, I didn't know what we would have to do. I didn't know if you had to hide under something or you run out onto the street, which is why a whole minute of this unseeable footage is just me standing there, rocking in the earthquake and thinking. But luckily, it did start dying down. Now this was the talk of the town for several days. A magnitude 6 earthquake in Australia, which was felt all the way from Adelaide to Sydney. There were some damages, such as a few buildings in some areas, though fortunately no one was hurt or injured. I also found some extra videos of people in the moment. This was 30 kilometers away from the epicenter, and I think they are so lucky there wasn't an avalanche. And I'm not playing the whole video now, but it goes on for over a minute. Another story that I heard, though, I think is the most terrifying from the earthquake. There was a dozen or so miners several hundred meters underground at the time when the shaking started. And I cannot imagine how they were feeling. That must have been horrifying. They would probably be thinking, which honestly they did say in their interviews, that they didn't think that they were going to make it out alive. Could you imagine going to your job just like every other day, and then this time having the absolute panic settle in that you might not get out of here?
And now I also have added in a meme review segment into this video because, because when you have a traumatic event or something that isn't quite as traumatic, the first response of the human race is to make memes and jokes about it, which I honestly don't think is a bad thing. I think as a way of dealing with a stressful event, I feel like it's perfectly fine to make jokes out of it as long as they're not offensive or able to harm people. Now, the first one is that good reminder that when the end of the world comes, our first instinct is going to be to make dumb jokes. And honestly, I feel like that's fine because we're having fun, okay? We're getting through this, and it's not that bad of an idea. We're fine. We're fine. We're fine. No, really. We're fine. We're perfectly fine. We're fine. We're not fine. We're not fine. We're not fine. They might have felt it, but I don't think people from Sydney will truly understand what it was like to live through Victoria's earthquake. Honestly, this is so funny to me because that's the exact reaction I had when I saw a tweet from someone in Sydney was like, was that an earthquake in Sydney? And I was like, hold on. Now, this is our earthquake. We claim this earthquake. This is Victoria's earthquake. Sydney can stay out of this. And it's honestly quite funny because, you know, there's this Melbourne-Sydney rivalry and everyone's always like poking fun at it, and I feel like this is just a classic example, along with this next one. And then there's this line of text messages, and I find it honestly quite hilarious that everyone's like, oh, is there an earthquake? Was that an earthquake? Was that an earthquake? And then Daniel Andrews, our premier, is like, yes guys, that was an earthquake. It's just funny to me because everyone was really freaking out about it.
Now, I haven't actually ever made a coat before, I haven't made anything remotely like a kefta before, and I didn't have a pattern for a coat at all. So what I did was I used a pattern that I have previously used for a recycled top, and I manipulated the neckline so that it sat a lot higher than the original neckline. I cut that out and I stitched those pieces together. And then for the skirt portion or the bottom portion, I actually cut out a quarter circle skirt, and then I sewed that onto the top portion while not closing the center front. It's also important to remember that since I wanted there to be buttons in the front, I had to leave an overlap in both the center front pieces so that I didn't strangle myself every time I tried to close up my garment. During this portion, I did make a few mistakes. One thing that I would have changed is that I probably would have used a pattern for something much higher collared, because the neckline of this is still a little bit too low for a coat, but it's okay, I'm over it now. I also really need to learn how to tailor things to the perfect size, but at the same time, I do feel like I needed more space in the bodice bit because I don't feel like I would be able to wear very much underneath this coat whenever I want to wear it out, so that's a minor downside, but I guess I'll deal with it. Once the top and the bottom were together, I hemmed off all of the sides that I needed. I didn't hem off any of the armholes because, well, first of all, this fabric isn't incredibly prone to fraying and I didn't really feel like doing much else work. So besides, I was going to attach the sleeves anyways. So that's what I did next. I prepared the sleeves and then I attached them. Now this did take a little bit of trial and error. I am not perfect at putting in sleeves yet, and there are some mistakes on the finished garment that show for it, but in the end, the sleeves are on and they're about the right size. I did leave the sleeves a little bit looser than perhaps I should have as compared to the bodice bit, but I really wanted to be able to wear something underneath it without it making my arms look too chunky. As for the embroidery situation, this was a little bit different because I know that you can, hypothetically, embroider with a normal sewing machine. I just wasn't entirely sure how to. And even then, I didn't want my first embroidery project to be on one of the garments that was turning out so well so far. Like, this is probably one of the things that I've made that's actually wearable to me. So while I was hunting around Pinterest, I found this lovely little photo, and this kind of reminded me more of lace than it did of embroidery. And that gave me the idea that perhaps I could find a fancy lace that would be able to substitute as fake embroidery. So I did go out months ago at this point, because I've had this project on my list for months, more than half a year at this point. And since that ribbon for me was grey, I didn't want grey on mine, so I also bought some fabric paint. So what I did was I measured out how much of the ribbon that I would need to make my coat look fancy and kefta enough. It definitely does not look like a kefta, but I feel like it does kind of fit the vibe, which is fine with me. So I traced out where I wanted the ribbon, I cut that much ribbon off, and then I got to painting it. While that had to dry for a minimum of 24 hours, I got to cutting out just a basic collar shape, and then I just sewed that on while watching Shadow and Bone. Alright, so it's been a sufficient amount of hours since I've painted these. It's been like 3 days and it only calls for like 24 hours. So now I have to iron these and then I have to wash them. Now it's time for buttons, and I got these absolutely beautiful buttons off eBay. And so now I have to mark out the holes where to put them, and then I have to actually attach on the buttons. And I've never done buttons before, so I don't know how this is gonna work. Now at this point, I was today years old when I found out that you could do buttonholes with a sewing machine. I was under the impression that I would have to hand sew the buttonholes, and I was really freaking out about spending hours and hours on this. But luckily, I found out just in the nick of time that you can do it on a sewing machine, and I'm so glad. So while I was trying to find my button foot, if that's even what it's called, I don't care what it's called, it makes sense to be called a button foot, so I shall call it thus. But while I was trying to find this button foot, guess what else popped out of the machine? A zipper foot. I was under the impression that we didn't have a zipper foot at home, and I have now installed only 2 zippers, which is a relief that I haven't installed more, or I would have hated myself for it. But the first zipper I ever installed, I did like 5 times because I kept messing it up. And I'm so mad that I didn't have a zipper foot then, but at the same time, I'm so happy because I'm planning on adding in so many more zippers into so many more garments next, and I'm so glad that I do have a zipper foot now. I'm so happy I could probably cry. So I feel like I have to explain what's going on here, but basically I put the coat on and then I flapped over this side, which is going to be where the buttonholes are, onto this side to see how much space I have in here to place the buttons. And so what I have to do next is that since this is all like a not very straight line, I'm going to take like the narrowest bit, maybe a little bit more than the narrowest bit, and I'm going to measure it out, and then I'm going to put it on this side so I know how much space I have for my buttonholes, so how much overlap there can be. And this might cause a bit of a problem. I think I might have to tighten it to the sides a bit so that it fits well and it's not just like good fit, rectangle, you know. Now I just got to measuring, and this part is honestly kind of boring, so I'm just going to tell you some other things that happened during this period. I got my first vaccine. I got the Pfizer shot and I'm really happy about it, and even though I'm terrified of vaccines, the doctor that handled me was pretty great. I didn't even see it coming. He literally just started talking and then he stabbed it in and then he pulled it out and I didn't feel a thing. So I'm really glad about that. It was made so simple for me, and I still managed to mess it up. Well, anyways, I did fix that messed up button, and I went through all of the buttonholes and I sewed them, and I didn't catch any of it on camera because it was the most stressful thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And here you can see me planning out my pockets, and they are not completely straight or good looking, and you will see why I didn't really care about what shape they were, as long as they were big enough pockets for me to stash stuff in like a minute.
Alright, so now I have these pockets all made up, and here's the thing, I don't know how to install pockets onto the front of a garment, and I'm incredibly scared of ruining my coat that way. And I'm also not entirely sure how I would cut open a side of this at the right place and then install a pocket in that way. But luckily for me, even though I did regret it at first, I thought I wasted all this extra fabric by making the top portion a bit too long. But now, I'm going to use this as a very unofficial, I don't know if it's even going to be stable, pocket. I'm just going to attach the pocket onto here, so it will be on the inside. It may make the coat a little bit bulky, but it's fine. I'm probably not going to use the pocket that much. I just need it there.
And now the final step was basically sewing on the buttons, and this was honestly kind of lovely. I loved seeing the buttons go on, and these buttons are so pretty and they make me so happy, and I'm so glad that this project is pretty much almost completely over.
Well, everyone, thank you for watching. I hope that you're having a good day. I hope that you continue to have a good day, and I'll see you next time.